Welcome to Software Without Borders, where we explore how technology, leadership, and culture intersect to drive global performance. I'm Andy Hilliard, CEO of Accelerants, joined today by my CFO and co-host, Scott Pauloff. Today's guest is Kristina Crane, a transformational executive, speaker, and fractional COO, CSO. She's also the founder and CEO of the Canyons Group, where she helps executives, government agencies, and growth companies navigate organizational transformation, especially through AI adoption and cultural change.
Kristina has an incredible background, 25 plus years leading strategy and operations in SaaS and government tech. At STC Health, she drove 10x revenue growth, shifted the business from 3% to 60% recurring SaaS revenue, and scaled globally during COVID, and implemented AI that improved efficiency by 60%.
Kristina, hey, welcome to Software Without Borders.
Well, thank you so much, Scott and Andy, for having me. I'm just excited to be here and to be talking to your audience about this really important topic.
You bet. So here's the way I like to start off every podcast, and that's just to get some contextual overview of who you are as a person, your trajectory, your experience over many decades. Not to say that, we're old, but, we have a lot of experience. Let me just say that. And, I'm just really curious about sort of how you went from, I don't know, I mean, frankly, you could start even before university, because what I really want to understand are transformational periods in your life in context with your history, pre-university, university, post-university. I mean, you were at STC Health for 12, 13 years. You even had, you've had a Kale Crane company and a consulting practice. So you have a combination of both consultative services and also, I guess client side, I would normally say to my vernacular. So describe a little bit about your history, your experience, your trajectory.
Yeah, thank you so much. So it's kind of interesting overall. I originally wanted to be a teacher of all things, which is why I think I love consulting so much and working with teams, because being able to really empower, adult learning and pieces there is so critical to me. And so I actually graduated with a teaching degree along with a business degree and started working in mostly government and nonprofit, working to develop their systems and helping them to really take what they were doing and privatize them in a way that they could bring in more dollars to their nonprofit. From that's where I started Kale Crane, which was a consultancy. From what we did there is we were basically an incubator for SaaS startups, helping them with the development of their systems and then helping them to go live. And we also worked with state governments to help their providers and health tech be able to reach the public, what they were producing at public health, be able to get that integrated into healthcare systems as well. So it was a very diverse background overall, with doing some incubation work in health tech wellness sector, as well as working specifically with the government to help make sure that what they were building would actually be able to be used by providers. From there, that's when I joined STC Health, and I was working, they were actually a client. And so they were a client of mine, worked with them for several years, and really saw that there was a way to take what they were doing in the industry and really be able to scale that in a different way. So joined their leadership team and really then led their transformational efforts from what I would call a more of a dev shop environment to more of a software as a service. And that was a new, for the government space as well. And so just again, really took that, learned every operational factor of a business doing that. They weren't set up as a software as a service initially. So you had to go through and really retrain a lot of the folks in terms of how they were thinking about that. And that'll be probably a lot that we'll be talking about here, because the AI transformation is not much dissimilar in terms of how you need to work anytime you're changing either the business model of an organization or other pieces there. And I was able to help STC onto its next venture through an acquisition, and now am back out working as a consultant, as you mentioned.
Can you describe to me the difference between Kale Crane and the Canyons Group, and how your experience at STC and probably external changes in the marketplace and environment, AI obviously one of those things. How did that shape what is the difference between these two companies, Kale and the Canyons Group, and how did the evolution occur?
That's a great question. So a lot of the evolution, I would say, has really come from the fact that I have a much more robust framework. And the way I'm thinking about people and change, and a lot of what my business is thinking about, is navigate to elevate. And navigate to elevate is really around how do you go through some of the canyons that happen in your business and your life on a regular basis, and how do you navigate those, but how do you really help empower your team to navigate those canyons? So really a lot of the work that I did with Kale Crane is really continuing on with the Canyons group, but really in a much more focused and branded methodology to really be able to help provide the industry with a little bit more of a framework versus just regular kind of, hey, I'm gonna come in and do specific kind of consulting for you ad hoc. Because what I've learned over the years is it's really important to empower people. And when we talk about AI and we talk about tech, I've always said in a lot of cases, we have to get the tech out of the building. Obviously, as technologists and folks that are working within tech, it's really important that we understand the technology, how it's working, so we can best put that in place. But for a lot of the business folks and the programmatic folks that work within the government, sometimes we speak with so much technology and we focus on the tooling and the tech that we forget about the people empowerment that has to happen to really be able to enable and make sure that the tech that we're implementing can be as frictionless as possible to really meet those outcomes.
There's a lot of FOMO and chaos and confusion, testing, trialing, obviously a lot of shiny objects out there, and companies are feeling like they want to start experimenting, touching the tech, having the tech deliver something, whether it's cost savings or some sort of measurable advantage. But I don't think a lot of companies are thinking about the human aspect, the HI, the human intelligence, and how it merges with AI, and how people are, they're not looking at this holistically. So what is sort of, how do you balance the rapid organizational change and the FOMO that's out there with actually keeping these teams engaged and aligned?
No, that's a really good question, and I think there's so much noise out there too. You have everybody from the folks that think AI is going to destroy the world, and then you have all the folks that think it's the easy button, and that you just have to click a button and we're all good and we don't have to do anything anymore. To somewhere in between, and the truth is always in the middle, right? It's never on the extremes as we really look at those different pieces. What I think is really important here, and this goes to any technology, it's when we were thinking about moving to the cloud, or when we were trying to implement, a workflow, you're trying to get Salesforce or a HubSpot, other kind of, systems and tooling into a organization, it really isn't much different than that. You have to start with the people. And if you don't get the buy-in from the team, you're not going to be able to get very far. And I think a lot of times in tech, depending on how the organization looks at it, they've typically said, hey, that's over here in the IT department. And Scott, being a CTO, and Andy, with your work that you've done over the years, the CTOs and CIOs are always saying, we got to be part of the business. We got to understand the business problem that's trying to be solved, and trying to get in there as much as they can. If they haven't been, they really need to be able to do that. Because what AI brings to the table is it brings to what the software development world has had to learn and do to everybody. You can now, as an individual, go in and start really interacting with the system using plain language, and in a way that basically opens up the thought process that we've had to have in the technology world for a very long time, to where we can build anything and everything. And so what that means is that the technology world, and this is the world that you all live in, we've developed all these frameworks over the years, because as you know, you can build anything with tech. The issue after that is that you may not actually be trying to build something that meets a market need or that's actually trying to solve a problem. But when you're building a building, you kind of know what the specs are. You've already kind of gone through all that. So if you're an engineer, that's a civil engineer that's building a building, you've already kind of gone through some of that process. At least the group that was going to go, the developer that was going to go build the development, they've already kind of done all those different pieces. And so they don't have to think about, what's the ROI that I'm going to get out of this particular decision every single day? Where technology, we've had to build all of that into everything that we do, because otherwise you'd be spending money on building the wrong things. And so we almost had to build, framework, systems, agile, even your BA and your receptionist. If you're in a startup, for example, they know the value that you're trying to bring and what you're trying to do from a North Star when you're developing software. It's part of the DNA that really the entire industry has built. And now with AI coming into the play, you're going to have a lot of that same kind of capabilities. You can get lost in the AI. You could be building things that may not be the right thing to do. So we really need to be training a whole new set of industry and people around how do you start to prioritize what you're going to work on so that you really can get the most out of utilizing these tools. And that's going to be a big shift, I believe, in the industry that a lot of folks aren't really seeing. And how do we help, these other organizations really get there?
Christine, I'm curious. Oftentimes, you have executive teams or founders who whose business experience is not necessarily tech. They may be running some sort of more traditional company, and obviously, they've struggled over the years to figure out how to automate or use SaaS tools or build custom software to help them, scale and grow. Obviously, now with AI, I know one of your big focuses is obviously leadership training and bringing executive teams forward. How do you deal with, I'll call them more old school executive teams who may not be as comfortable with technology or obviously AI or whatever's next?
Yeah, no, this is a really important piece. And I think that's why when I say get the tech out of the room, that's kind of where I start with. We have to stop almost in some cases making it a technology problem and really start making it a business problem. So go back to what works for solid, good business practices. And then us as the technologists, we need to be able to then translate that back in a more meaningful way. And I think there's a lot that can happen when that becomes more powerful. Because to your point, if you start a construction company, you start a civil engineering company, for example, or an architect firm, or a retail store, you didn't go into that business to run a tech company. You would have started a tech company if that's what you wanted to do. And so I think it's really important, and I love this question so much, that we really remember the audience that we're working with, but how important technology can be to really enable their people. But for them to really be able to leverage this, there's some easy things that they can start to do out of the gate. And one of them is build that culture of curiosity. And I talk a lot about that
Mhm.
because that's where you really start to empower and trust your team to be able to start experimenting and trying new things around the guardrails, specifically around. So, for example, if you're a retail store, how can you maybe use AI to improve your inventory and how you're doing inventory management, for example? You
Right.
can take pictures and have it do the count, for example. Well, how do you experiment with that without, with your folks? And it really becomes part of where every business should already be doing this anyway, but they really haven't necessarily been given some of the leadership skills on knowing how to best do that. So it's asking questions, and it's also starting to really put a culture in place that allows your team to question. So when you're asking for something to be done, you just start making sure that you have solid principles that allows anyone that's being asked to do something that they can ask, well, why? What's why and what's the outcome? Just those two questions really start to make a big difference. And you start to realize that your people within your organization have a lot of great ideas and can actually, in a lot of cases, really start to solve more of the problems and issues that are happening and then bring that to the table. And then I think, Scott, to your point though as well, you're going to still need technologists, because a lot of what AI is able to do today is do some of the prototyping and some of the experimentation that can happen. But once you maybe get a new workflow or something that's working, that's when I think you're going to still need a good partner. And a lot of the MIT studies and other items that are coming out are really demonstrating this, to really make it production ready. Because you're going to want to, once you get a new workflow or something that's really working, then you're going to want to basically make sure that you can roll that out to everybody within the organization. But it's no longer a cookie cutter approach to where you have to use a tool a certain way. Now the team is really able to work on those experimentations and come up with a new workflow that's really going to work. And they're part of that solution, which then means it's going to be better adopted and you're going to get more acceleration. But the mindset does have to change within the C-suite. And I think the C-suite really wants to utilize their staff. I know I did, and other folks. And a lot of times it's just having a good framework and a couple things that you can start to do that really start to open the doors.
Well, talk a little bit about the C-suite, the framework, the prioritization based on the largest amount of value that can be created in the, I guess, I was going to say the shortest amount of time, but just prioritizing organizational focus around the automation of real impactful value centers versus also creating this culture of curiosity and not allowing people to run rampant with a lot of shiny object productivity, areas that might be lower priority, might be front office versus back office. Like, how do you manage both of those things at the same time? Because I always wonder, is like, how do you go in an organization and everyone, is curious and everyone, has their own little AI things going on and they're probably very embryonic and scattered all over the place and relatively low value. And now you're also telling senior management, the C-suite, to say, okay, let's take a breather. Let's go slow to go fast. Let's prioritize things. I mean, how do you approach them to do that? And how do you organize them to create this guiding framework?
So a couple of things. So one, good that they're trying to do some experimentation. There's some agencies that aren't even there. So first thing, you're on the first block here. Or at least you hopefully have corporate accounts and you're letting your folks not use their personal accounts. That's really important. And that they have a good governance policy in place. So let's make sure we get the governance policy in place so that folks know where they can skate and how they can skate and use AI safely within the organization so that the organization's IP and or brand doesn't get diluted, through the use of personal AI accounts that happen a lot. So that's number one. Once they have that and they are maybe doing some experimentation, that's great. That means that they're already open to different things. But to your point, they're probably not getting the best value out of that. And that's where you really have to start pulling in some of the frameworks that have worked really well for the best software companies in the world. We don't have to reinvent the world, the wheel here, but we do need to at least start maybe educating folks and maybe not as much of a technical framework and really make it make sense to them. So one recommendation is that you set up, I call them curiosity champion groups, essentially. And they could be tasked with either one or two different pillars. So as you start to look at, if you're a large organization, maybe manufacturing other pieces, you probably have product innovation group. That group really should be thinking, well, how am I going to be utilizing AI, to continue to innovate my product, maybe go after new markets, new pieces. Then you're going to have, your operational focused folks that are really looking at, how am I going to improve our back office, our customer experience, how we interact with customers. Maybe today it takes us 8 hours to do a particular task every single week. So I can quantify it. I know what that task needs to look like. And I also know what the cost is to doing that. And our staff knows what excellence looks like when this particular item is getting done. And so if you have those in place and you really start to look at these groups a little bit differently, the framework I like to use is more the RICE formula or ICE formula, which really stands for reach. So what's the number of users that are going to be impacted by this? So if you're working on an operational piece, that's where you can start to say, how many folks do this in our agency every single day if we're talking about an internal operational component? How many people are having to touch this particular flow, workflow, or piece of data that's happening? Then you look at the impact. So how is this going to improve? What do we think? What's our hypothesis, essentially, of what we think that this improvement's going to be doing? Confidence. how good do we feel? Are we just kind of throwing, spaghetti at the wall, for example, or have we actually we know that this particular task takes us 10 hours a week or 5 different FTEs, and the FTEs here could be doing other customer outreach if they weren't doing that 10 hours a week, for example. And then you really start to look at your effort to actually implement this. So your effort there isn't about what you're currently doing. It's more about, if I were to experiment around updating this process to use AI, how long is that going to take me to be able to implement and quickly experiment to see if that's still a good use case? And you really have to train the teams. Don't call them sprints if you're not talking to a technical team, but every 2 weeks you're going to have what we call a brown bag lunch or innovation curiosity sharing session, and you're going to share with a larger group of key stakeholders within the organization what you're learning through the process here. And so you, by osmosis, start to really train folks on how to start to build that culture of curiosity, how to start to break down some of those silos, but you're doing it in real time, and you're doing it in a way that feels pretty safe, to folks. And at the beginning, I don't even really look at the rice formula to start with. If they're doing experiments, let's just get those every 2 week share and learns going, and then start working with them on some of the more mature frameworks so they can actually start to really figure out what they want to invest in and why. And so you don't do everything all at once. That doesn't get anywhere. You can't run a marathon off the couch. You do have to get off the couch first. So and I'm a runner, so I love those kind of examples, and that's again why I did the canyons analogy, because I do a ton of hiking, Grand Canyon, all of that. And when you're out in the wilderness or you're doing any of these kind of extreme sports, you learn a lot. But you can't learn anything unless you get off the couch, start taking a couple steps. And that's where you really need to work with the staff. It can be really overwhelming and scary. So make it really simple as possible and just try to implement some things that they're already doing. It's amazing when you just start to do those kind of actions, what starts to happen within the organization just by putting some of these things in place.
Christina, I wanted to maybe change directions a little bit and maybe take it up to 30,000 feet. I know, obviously, one of your core concepts is connecting strategy with operations. And I think we've been talking a lot about operations, but I'm just curious from a strategy standpoint. Strategy happens to be something that I personally love. So I'm very curious as to your perspective. I know when you were at STC Health, you were instrumental in kind of flipping their business model. And it feels like we're at a time where it just feels like we're one of those moments where companies really have to take a deep dive and say, are we in the right business? Does our value proposition still make sense? Will it make sense in 12 months, 24 months, 60 months? How's AI going to change what we're doing? If we need 500 people in our company today, will it look like 100 people in 5 years? Are we serving the right customers? I'm sort of curious, what's your take on how businesses are going to have to proceed going forward, and how often do you really need to iterate now in your business model to make it make sense?
You're going to be doing, I think, a lot of iteration, and there's going to be a faster iteration over time, even more than there used to be. That's where I think some of the advantage of some of the startups, and why you're seeing, if you're on YouTube, for example, and you're Googling AI and all those other pieces, they're able to go quickly because it's new. And the other organizations that have been around, you might have been in business for 10, 15 years. And let's say you're a law practice. There are whole areas of our professional organizations that are going to be going through change, just like it happened with even professional services, for example. If you're a plumber or HVAC, for example, those industries have already been going through a lot of change. They already have subscription models, other pieces in place, especially as a lot of private equity has kind of entered those spaces. There's going to be a lot of change, and other pieces I think are going to happen more in your professional kind of environments. And we really have to treat and teach these organizations a lot of what the software industry has done around business planning and strategic planning as well. As you know, as you're trying to find product market fit in the software industry, you do a lot of work of what you were talking about, Scott, in terms of, are we still trying to go after the right ideal customer? What does that right ideal customer look like? Why am I in this space? Is the business model working. I mean, software went through a massive change. If you think about it, I don't know, we all joked at the beginning of this how old we were. So we remember when you got the CD-ROM. It was actually floppy disk originally, but you got the CD-ROM or floppy disk in the mail for your Windows operating system or your Word and Excel, and you just bought a license for that. Well, now you buy a subscription. And we all lived in the last 10, 15 years when Salesforce and other groups were coming on board. That was really the big transformation where the software industry really had to change its model. So big companies, Microsoft, Oracle, a lot of these large, huge behemoths of software already had to go through that change and really think about how are they going to take the services that they're doing or the product that they're giving to somebody, and how do we, make a different type of package. And so from a strategic standpoint, it's really important for the C-suite to be thinking about these questions and not even be thinking 5 years out. They really need to be thinking, okay, what's our North Star in the next 3 years with these changes? What are some new models that we can actually put together? And if we're able to really leverage the data that we have, a lot of these organizations are sitting on a lot of data, and not in a data that you'd want to just go resell to people. That's not what we're talking about. That gets it.
Right.
But what we're talking about here is how can you use the information that you have at your disposal to build new products and or new solutions in a meaningful way, and be able to do that much more quickly now because of the opportunity that AI can unveil, and the ability to rapidly thinking about your offering, the product market fit for a lot of these organizations. It's going to be another key element that they also, in addition to the operational changes we talked about, they're going to need, I think, a lot of assistance to really help, especially businesses that have been around for 10 plus years. You kind of get into that 10-year mark, you're getting well established, you made it
Mm-hmm.
through a lot of those big milestones, and you're kind of set in a lot of a pace here. And the ability for those types of groups to rapidly change is going to be really critical.
It's interesting. I had a meeting recently with somebody at a $4 billion, I'll call it boring business. And he was telling me just about the innovation at that company and the innovation mindset and how they're really trying to take advantage of all the new technologies versus his previous employer, which again was in one of those quote unquote we'll call boring industries, and they really were doing nothing. So I think the companies that win will really go out of their way to, you know, every quarter, every year, you have to really be thinking about what's next and not just improving upon what you currently have, but really, what is really good. Where can we really take not incremental but large steps forward, change the direction, and really, make a dent in your market. So I appreciate your perspective.
Well, and how do you do that without hurting your current business and your staff feeling like you're all over the place? And there are methodologies to do that, and they're proven. So really helping to train and work with the leadership team on how to best do that. Like for example, STC, we couldn't. It was a 30. When I joined, the company had already been around for 26 years. And so you're taking, a lot of practices that have been around. You're selling into the government. We had to change the way we were selling into the government and working there. So you're talking about a lot of institutional different type of change, but you had to keep the lights on while you're making those changes. And so really also being able to identify how to best do that is that's also really important for these leadership teams so that they don't end up, hurting their current customer base and their current offerings while they're starting to really innovate. And I loved what you said. It's not just incremental innovation. They're probably already doing that to some degree. It really is now, where are those big leaps that we can start to take to really be able to put a new moat around our business.
Yeah, yeah. So, Kristina, we work with a lot of consultants and a lot of global software developers and obviously clients in the end to produce outcomes. And I often use this analogy that the client today, or the people that we deal with, the CTOs and the stakeholders around them, if you give them a Home Depot credit card and access to ChatGPT and access to YouTube, they can do all the consulting and they can be the expert plumber. They don't need to hire an expert plumber. because they could figure it out themselves. And 6 months later, when everything is duct taped and leaking all over the place and flooding, they sort of rethink that. But everyone thinks that they are empowered to solve their own problems. So they may come to the Canyon Group and you may talk about your framework and approach to this, and they're like, okay, framework, ChatGPT, build out, my own internal consulting organization. Let's go. Let's execute this thing, and look how much money I saved. I'm just really curious because I'm in the same boat too, because we're talking about what we do, but I'm not gonna load your answer into this question. How do you approach companies in organizing, prioritizing, executing, and seeing value out of this without them just, trying to figure it out themselves on the cheap?
Yeah, so well, they can do that. They can try, and I think some do, and they learn and they iterate off of that. But I do think if they're going to want to go quickly, there is value in folks that have already lived it and done it. So we know, I can tell you what worked and didn't work and why it didn't work all day long, and things that in one company may work, but they may not work for your company for various reasons. And so, really having someone that can read the room in a lot of cases, I think is really important because each company has its own culture, and you're not going to be able to get that from watching the YouTube videos or other pieces. And so, unless you have the ability to really kind of apply that back into your culture, then I would say you absolutely need a consultant. And the consultant isn't just there to give you the framework. They're there if they're good and they're a good partner. They're going to be there right beside you. They're going to be talking to your staff. They're going to be putting plans together. They're going to help coach you in terms of how some of the things that you could be doing differently within the organization. I use coaches on a regular basis too, because they helped me go faster with the transformation I was trying to do. Because sometimes as well, just like when you guys all have kids, it's funny. You have your kids and you haven't seen your best friend maybe in like 3 or 4 years, and you feel like you just saw them. It's no big deal. Hey, I just saw you. It wasn't that long ago. But then you realize their kid used to be shorter than you and now they're taller than you. And boy, what
Yeah.
happened there? A lot of time has gone past. And that's because your kids grow at a faster rate. When you're in something, you often don't realize and see what's actually changing and happening before you. And so, really having someone from the outside be able to come in and give you those observations can really help you accelerate more quickly.
And also be accountable for deliverables to execute on the framework. My kids, I just this all harks back to when my daughter entered the school, and every student and every parent had to read this book, The Value of a Skin Knee. And it has sort of two tracks. One is like you need to skin your own knees to gain the experience and to feel what it's like to make mistakes, and then to recalibrate and figure out what you're doing wrong. But at the same time, you also need to surround yourselves with people that have skinned their knee many, many times, so that they can give you a better critical path to the right way to do things. So it's a combination of the two. And I just always think back, like, what a valuable lesson, not only for kids entering high school, but for, companies that are going down a new path like this. And like, how do they learn and internalize, but how do they leverage external objectivity, accountability, execution, and experience, right?
Yep. And know that what you're going through is okay. Change is hard. And what we're talking about here is going to be probably one of the most hardest transformation, especially for professional services, white collar, and other folks in this industry. We don't all know what that's all going to look like in the end, but we do know that things are going to be changing. And the way that we do work in these industries are going to change. So the ability to walk through that and know that it's going to be okay in the end, because we can take care of our own destiny, I think is really, really important. But if we aren't helping our folks and empowering our leaders to be able to do that, then we're going to be just rafting down the river, and we're not going to be able to really, make sure that we're navigating it in a methodical way that allows us to get to where we want to get to in the end.
Kristina, I'm curious. I know at STC Health, you were integrally involved with the World Cup. And I don't know if you know this, but the Hilliard family has a deep background in soccer. and I figured this might be interesting to Andy, if nothing else. And obviously, Accelerants is a globally, our focus is globally distributed teams and making globally distributed teams work. When you're talking about the World Cup, you're talking about the global event, other than maybe the Olympics. And obviously, it's a discrete period of time when the World Cup happens. Everything has to happen beforehand. It all has to be ready. It all has to go well over that period of time. What was that experience like for you? And I guess I'm curious, what did you learn from being involved in something like that?
So I love that question. So just to kind of give a little bit more background on that, when you are a World Cup host or Olympic host, a lot of the agencies will require the host country, obviously when they submit their grant in other areas, to say, hey, here's how we're going to be improving infrastructure and ensure that we have a lot of these pieces in place. Well, public health infrastructure is just one of those key elements that have to happen. And if you have solid public health infrastructure, you're going to have a disease surveillance application. You're going to have an immunization registry that kind of tracks this different information across the board. And so STC Health immunization registries was our bread and butter. That's what we did. So we won the bid to basically be the back end infrastructure for the World Cup and for Qatar as a whole. Because not just about the World Cup, it's about building this infrastructure that then the host nation will be able to continue to have and use, forever, essentially. So when we did that, I basically I can tell you how to get really fast flights back and forth because I have kids. So I would try to minimize the amount of time I was over in the Middle East, just so I could, be there and got really good at the travel back and forth. But it was amazing. It was amazing to see the type of work that was going in to really make sure the whole entire World Cup was successful. And Qatar was an interesting location because you could get to all the games within a day's drive at the minimum. So, for example, when we host the World Cup here in the U.S. or other European countries, sometimes will host, they will typically spread it across multiple cities. So you may not be able to actually easily get to all the games. So Qatar is a relatively small landmass country. And so that was a really cool thing to really kind of see how they were putting that together. But then the infrastructure around the public health, they never had these public health systems before, but they had a robust healthcare system. So very similar to Canada or the European system, to where, you basically got, you could go to either a private hospital and or the Qatar public hospital. And how do we basically take, the electronic medical record systems and those things and tie them back in so that they could have that? And then what was the change management that they needed, to make sure that they were capturing this really important information during the World Cup in case there was an outbreak or some other type of disease stand. So we spent a lot of time understanding their policies, their procedures, and how do we best then help train and roll out, a system that had been being used in the US for years, but really how were we able to help them with the change management that they could really then leverage that with minimal changes on their side to be able to be ready for the World Cup.
Great. It must have been an incredible experience.
It was amazing. And I will tell you, the coolest thing they did with their stadiums is they built several that were temporary. And then they were able to sell those to Africa and other countries that needed stadiums, essentially. So they were reusable. They weren't just building massive stadiums that were going to be there forever. They really thought through in terms of how they could make that really work sustainable. And really kind of thinking about how then those stadiums could be reused in other countries that needed some additional support.
I'm sorry. Describe other countries. What do you mean reusable in other countries?
So they made these collapsible temporary stadiums that then they took down and they shipped to other countries to be able to then be able to have in use. Not all of
Wow.
them, but there were several that were built modular in a way that they were able to do that.
Wow. I was thinking maybe they were inflatable or something.
Not that, no, they're too big.
And
Well, that's just a great example of innovation. I mean, it's not something you would think about, but obviously, it served the purpose, and now it's going to exist in perpetuity somewhere else. So that's amazing. Well, let me turn to Let me turn to the future. So you've obviously seen firsthand how AI, culture, and leadership are converging. Looking ahead, what do you believe the future of transformation leadership actually looks like?
Great question. I really think that, for a lot of businesses, they need to do a couple of things. One, they need to step back. They need to not chase after every single tool that's out there. And they really are going to need to, really empower their teams. There's actually one of the key lessons I learned, and this was a hard lesson that I had to learn as I've been working with different folks. But that is, it's a proverb, as you guys know. It's if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I really think that for a lot of businesses, and you gave the example about, the two different boring companies, the tale of two different cities, if you want to say it that way. And there really is a difference. But the methodologies that were happening in the company that's more innovative, those can be trained and passed on to the small and medium sized and large businesses in our country. And they're going to need to have that type of culture of curiosity to really be able to move forward. And what that means is they're going to have to start empowering and trusting their team. But that means they really have to learn the mechanics and methods to do that. And that can be difficult, especially if you're in an industry where you say, well, this is how we always do it. And our people just follow this particular standard. They do what they're told. We don't really empower them to ask those questions why. But if you're not able to really put that in place, then you're really not going to be able to leverage the tools that are in place, because one person isn't going to be able to change your operations.
Right.
And really, for a lot of these organizations, it's taking a look at that. What are we doing today? And really being able to ask those hard questions to make sure that they are pivoting from an innovation, as you were saying earlier, Scott. It's not just about the operations, but then
Hmm.
operationally, have they trained their folks either on Six Sigma, other methodologies, to really be able to start to look at operationally what they're doing and be okay with honestly probably reworking their operations every 6 to a year for now, and while these things are coming out, or at least re-looking at the operations to say, hey, can this particular thing, can I start to automate that? Are there other ways for us to do what we need to do to deliver value to our customers? How does that start to free us up as an organization to be able to grow and add more value? I think personal touch is going to become even more important. I think people already feel like, oh, is that a bot talking to me? So anything customer facing, while there are things that you can start to do now to automate, you're going to want to free up your folks to be able to really harness and build a real good personal connection. That takes time to really be able to do that. So how do we really start to automate the other things that take away from that personal human touch? And those are the areas I would really be recommending, that people are looking at and thinking about within that organization. And it does take a little bit of different type of leadership, in terms of really thinking about how are we helping our leaders and our managers really manage to an empowered team and an empowered
Hmm.
people mindset.
Yeah. So, Christina, everything we've talked about today, it seems like it could be applied to every single, frankly, almost every business on the planet. But just speaking specifically to the Canyon Group, like what is your ICP, ideal client profile? What big, small, locationally, industry focus? What kind of clients do you think are you most best applied for?
So I would think businesses that, again, have been around for 10 plus years, just because they're well established. They already are kind of in particular processes, procedures to really kind of maximize that. Businesses that are obviously around, 10 plus million, because at that point you've already started to build out some processes, procedures in place. When you're too early, it's a lot easier for those startups and other groups to really kind of start to get themselves to where they need to be. And I actually think that the businesses, 15 million plus, are actually at the most at risk, to losing some market share, because in a lot of cases they aren't easily able to adapt and really kind of, just because they have put together so many different procedures and other areas from a maturity standpoint. So that would be kind of the sizing of the organization. From from a professional services, I think professional services groups, looking at any groups that are really. I've been working with a couple construction organizations and others, and that's mainly because in a lot of cases they really haven't brought technology into some of those industries yet. And so, really where those pieces come in. Obviously, anyone that is a software as a service SaaS organization that's been around for a long time, that just need help to understand, well, how am I going to look at my other markets here? But in a lot of cases, those guys are hopefully already utilizing AI and have been thinking about utilizing AI within their platform. So I think it's more the traditional business sets as we really look at that, because that's where the transformation is mostly needed, especially when I'm speaking to small and medium sized businesses around the country. They're just there's a lot of extra support that's really needed there.
And do you work specifically with functional leadership as your, key interface, or does it have to be? Should it necessarily be top down because you need, C-level, CEO level support and a holistic mindset for the entire organization? How does that typically work?
No, great. You need the buy-in from the leadership team. So the leadership team needs to know that this is something that's happening. But honestly, a lot of the work that I try to do as well is working actually with the direct team so that they can learn how to actually walk the walk. So it's not just, hey, we're going to come here and put this together, but someone needs to help kind of facilitate maybe a couple of those first luncheons, those lunch and learns, and really helping the team be able to even come up with how are they going to do the prioritization methodology. So it's definitely working with, I would say, with the folks in the organization that really want to start to do the innovation and really change the organization. It's with that first start a group, really getting that more formalized within the organization as a whole, and working them with the leadership team so they really do understand that. Because if the leadership teams can unwittingly undo a lot of the changes you're trying to do just based on how they speak and the language that they're using to the folks that they manage. And so it's really important that they understand that piece there so that they don't undo some of the innovation pieces that you're trying to do with the larger team set.
Yeah. Do you what sort of red flags or scenarios might you encounter as you start to talk to stakeholders and leadership, and that might cause for concern in terms of them not, buying into the Canyon framework or methodology and the way they approach things? How do you mitigate that from happening?
So a couple things is you really have to go in up front. So this is going to cause a lot of change. It's
Yeah,
going, some of the folks in
change
the
is possible.
organization are not going to like this. Let's let them be for a little bit, but at some point you're going to have to make some other decisions. But you always want to work with the folks that are early adopters and excited to do that. So you find those folks. I would say some of the red flags are going to be, oh well, everything has to go through me. I can't if the team is asking for anything or do anything, you have to go. Obviously, things need to go through a final decision making, any of those other areas. But that just tells me that they haven't really they're not ready to start empowering their team. But that takes time, and you also have to, as you kind of walk through this. In some cases, depending on the type of organization, if it's founder led, for example, or if they or different types of and the size of the organization and how they've really been maximizing their management team. In some cases, they may already have some of these skill sets. They just don't know how to bring it together across the different work groups within the organizations. Because a lot of organizations that are siloed, as they start to do that, and to make AI and a lot of these systems work, you have to start kind of doing that cross cutting across departments. So it would be one, any of the leaders saying, "Hey, I don't want my team working with that other team." That's a big red flag. And then obviously some of the language would be, well, that they have to get permission to go through. That has to go through some of these checks and balances before the team can start to experiment. Versus, hey, I gave this team. Let's say we want them to increase marketing leads by 20% in the next month. Then you let the team go figure out how they're going to do that. And they come back and say how they did that versus, no, I need to approve how the team is going to move forward with that before they try an experiment. And so those are really some red flags and different ways of getting there. And sometimes it may not mean that the company can't move forward. It's more just helping to coach them on what those differences are. Because they like we said when we were talking about our kids, you didn't realize how fast your kid was growing. You didn't actually realize that that was something that you were doing just in the language that you were using or how you were putting those things into place.
This has really been inspiring and a deeply human conversation. And these are the kind of conversations that I really like. And, thanks for telling us that transformation isn't just systems and metrics. It's about people, purpose, courage, and so forth. And before I forget, how do people get in touch with you?
No, great question. So I'm on LinkedIn. I'm Kristina Crane with a K for Christina, C for Crane. And you can also, reach me at my email, Christina at thecanyonsgroup.com. And all of that information is right there. I love for folks to reach out either via, again, LinkedIn or send me an email. Would love to connect.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, Christina, this has been wonderful. And I think a big thing for me is growth mindset. And that's layered in 100% of what you do for your clients. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and check out Software Without Borders for more conversations with transformational leaders like Kristina.